Welcome to the Grow Podcast. I'm Pastor Mike with New Hope Network. We're here to help you take your next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're with us today.
What's up, New Hope family? Welcome to the Grow Podcast. My name is David. I'm so happy that you joined us this week. This is episode 71 of the Grow Podcast.
71.
With me, as always, is Pastor
71.
Mike. We've done a lot of these. We've sat in this room.
I didn't know we had that much to say.
Well, you've sat in this room 71 times. What if
Okay,
I've missed,
maybe I have that much to say.
I've missed two, I think. Is that
Couple.
right? Kylie did one, and Hattie has done one now. So I think I've missed two. Producer, is that right? Have I missed more than those two?
He doesn't know.
He's napping. One of these podcasts, we need to have that chair for probably me to sit in.
Yeah.
Do you have another one of those chairs somewhere in the building?
That is my most comfortable chair.
It's a very comfortable chair.
It's a very comfortable chair.
We were trying to work plans out for something the other day, and I came in and I needed to research some stuff. So you were working at your desk that you have in the podcast room here, and I was sitting in it, and I was like, "This is not bad. I may take longer to look this up than I need." I mean, the office chairs aren't the most.
No.
They're not like horrifically uncomfortable. They're better than a lot of chairs.
Yeah.
But they're not that chair.
It's like the perfect dad leather chair. It's not a recliner,
it's a dad
but
chair.
it's
honestly, it's
big,
kind of
cushy.
a grandpa chair.
Yeah.
In the best way possible.
Yeah. Very cushy leather. It's got the footstool.
My grandpa always had his chair. He lived in Arizona, so it's not like we were ever at his house all the time, but I know even today, if I'm at Grandma and Grandpa's house, I know which chair is Grandpa's chair. Yeah. I hope to be that grandpa one day. I would like.
We're all talking about everybody's going, what is this chair?
Do you have like a chair like that at all? Are you old enough yet to have this is where I sit and the family knows to not mess with it?
No. I mean,
you'll get there.
There's a chair we kind of bought for that, but different people sit in it.
In the basement? Hopefully not the one that upstairs. I always end up sitting in the basement, and you're harboring this hostility towards me.
I do have a spot in the basement, but it's on the couch. There's a chase lounge on the end of the couch, and that's with that. That's where my big TV and the stereo and everything is down there.
We watched a movie on that TV
we did.
together.
We were preparing for a series that never happened.
That is true. I didn't know if we wanted to spoil the fact that the series didn't happen.
And at the movie series that we were hoping would happen, that might come back someday.
Maybe one day. People liked the first one we did. Yeah. That was a good time. And it was around your favorite time of the year.
Yes.
That I will not mention until after Thanksgiving.
You won't even mention it.
That's the level I have to go to around you when it comes to that holiday in late December.
Yeah.
Because
the holiday that's about Jesus.
Who came up with the idea of giving thanks? It was probably Jesus, right? Thanksgiving's the best one. You mentioned last week on the podcast, mentioned Thanksgiving.
I did.
But it was during a serious part of your teaching. And I really wanted to interrupt with, that's the greatest holiday there is.
I'm going to have to go back.
But it was towards the end. I think it was kind of, you were kind of doing like the next step thing.
No, we were talking about praying ahead and listening to God's plans.
Yeah. Yep. And I really wanted to interrupt you. I was like, this isn't the time. I showed some self-control.
That's funny.
But I needed all of you to know at home, if you're not watching, I'm looking at you and pointing at you right now in the camera, that Thanksgiving is the greatest holiday.
We should have a poll. We should take a poll.
We took one.
Christmas or Thanksgiving?
We took one on the lobby last holiday season, and it did not go my way, and it was a huge bummer. So,
see, that's why I know I'm safe with that poll, because I think I can predict it.
But Hattie's on my team, which I appreciate. Hattie is on team Thanksgiving is the best holiday. That doesn't matter. So both of the people who have recently hosted the Grow Podcast are Team Thanksgiving.
Episode 72 will have a new host.
A huge Christmas fan. They will be wearing a Santa Claus costume.
Something.
Just for job security. Yeah, if you ever see me just wearing Christmas clothes randomly, you know that like Pastor Mike and I had a serious conversation at work, and I'm trying to keep my job.
You have Christmas music playing.
That's
fun.
We talked about that not too long ago, but as we were planning some of our online stuff, Michael and Pastor Jordan and I were listening to some Christmas music just today.
Wow.
I'm
impressed.
In Michael and my office. And I was like, I haven't even heard Pastor Mike listening to Christmas music yet.
It's happened. Just this week, in fact, I was in study mode, and so I just had actually an album you recommended to me, a Christmas album you recommended to me. I don't remember exactly who it was. It was a newer one.
Old Lang Syne by Reliant K. Do you remember when I played that one for you?
Yeah.
Strongly recommend to all of you at home.
I'll have to look it up. Okay. But I had that album playing because I hadn't listened to it yet.
I do have, I think you laughed at me last year, but I have a playlist that is titled Acceptable Christmas because I don't hate all Christmas music, but a lot of it is just, you hear it.
People have strong opinions about it.
You just kind of get sick of it. And so I have a playlist, and my beloved wife, who loves Christmas music, is pretty great about, if I'm around when she's playing Christmas music early, she'll pull my playlist up and play it. So at least it's, like probably that album that I shared with you and a bunch of other ones.
It's good.
Yeah, it approaches.
It does.
But before we get there, let's have a fun time talking about Judges.
Yeah, this is a crazy book.
What a fun book, Pastor Mike. Interestingly, I loved reading these when I was a kid. Because I feel like as a little kid, I didn't comprehend, not that I didn't believe they were true as a kid, but I wasn't old enough to personify the people in the book that these things were happening to. I remember before I had a kid, and man, nothing drove me more nuts than friends that had kids, and they're like, well, you don't understand, but when you have kids, you'll understand. I'm like, calm down, people with kids. But once you do have kids, it's not that you understand more, it's that you start to put your kid in the situation. So if you hear about a friend's kid who's sick or something, or when Leighton fell and had to get staples in his head, if that happened to a friend of mine, I would think about my child in that scenario. And I feel like as you get older, when I read the Old Testament, some of just the horrible stuff that happens, I don't just think about them as characters in a book I'm reading, but as real people that these things actually happen to.
And that's some of the key, when we're talking about upper story, lower story, my story. To think about lower story is not just a history textbook. Yeah. But these are real people. So imagine, what you did is actually a brilliant way and a very meaningful way to read these stories. Is go, okay, what would this look like if this was my child, if this was my friend, and to inject yourself into that moment.
Can we make a note that at 7 minutes or so into the podcast, Pastor Mike said I did something brilliant, and could you clip that out for me just so I can have it?
Yeah, let's make sure we edit that
out. So, like you said, Judges is kind of crazy. So we're not going to deep dive all of the craziness, but I wrote down, I have some notes.
Yeah.
Fun's an interesting word. Some of the crazy thing. Now, some of these I have mentioned on the podcast. You have. A lot.
I've been expecting
because I've been begging you to do a sermon series just on the fat guy who gets stabbed. And it's fine. We're finally here. We're in Judges. Now the judge, is it Ehud? Ehud? Do you know?
I don't know.
Again,
Ehud. I'm pronunciation. That's how I've always pronounced it.
He's kind of awesome.
Yes.
At killing people, but it's not just killing anybody. He went to kill this king, and he was kind of like an assassin before assassins
existed.
Kind of
sneaky about it.
Which is interesting. This is the history nerd in me, but the ancient Israelites are kind of credited with having the first, before ninjas, before the what are the ones in the Islamic assassins that were kind of predated everybody. Anyway, something. I don't know. Anyway, but they during the Roman occupation, during Jesus' time, were kind of the first cloak and dagger assassins, where they'd hide their weapon and attack in daylight. And then there's this guy in Judges who goes, and there's a king, and he stabs him, and he's so fat that his fat engulfs the sword or knife or whatever.
You're way too excited about this story.
Hilarious for 5th grade David to read this story. If you can, again, put yourself in my shoes at the time.
And there is, there's some very, warfare, bloody moments that also have some humor in them.
Sure.
And this is one of those. Humor. Yeah, and it's very dark humor, but this is one of those, and then when he leaves and they go, he must be going to the bathroom. But when you understand what was actually happening, the dagger, okay, this is a lot of information, probably perforated his bowels.
Yeah.
As the way scholars so the smell was like, oh, he's going to the bathroom. So you go, oh,
sure.
But yeah.
And if he was that big, they had probably he'd probably had some epic bathroom moments before in his. This is a weird episode of the Grow Podcast.
But it's a great reminder. The Bible is not telling made up stories.
Right.
So you put yourself in these situations. These are real situations.
Yeah. The part that I think gets overlooked in that story, because of the part that's obviously fascinating, is kind of the brilliance of like getting alone with the king in that scenario and then pulling it off and then getting out before it's very fascinating. Mm-hmm. We also had the king who gets the tent stake through his temple, which was another one that I've brought up here. He's running away and he hides in this woman's tent. She gives him food, gives him like milk to drink or something like that, and he falls asleep and she takes care of him.
And those tent pegs were not like little nails. They would have been...
Yeah, they weren't like my tent pegs for my tent.
Some of them, for nomadic tribes, they would have been potentially a couple feet long and, an inch or two around. So, it would have been a serious...
Fascinating
thing. Yeah.
Then there are some that are harder to wrap my head around. So you've got the Levite and his concubine, which it refers to her as his concubine, but it also says that they're married. It's kind of a weird, I don't know. But so he's traveling and the men of this town come to try to sexually assault him. And the solution is to give her to them instead. So they do, and then she dies from it. But he's not punished for just handing her over. And then he like cuts her up and sends her to all the corners of Israel so that they'll all get riled up and it starts a war. And I'm like, why did this happen? Why is this in there? Why? What a horrific
and so much,
thing.
And like with that one, we never really see where God says, "Oh, that was the right thing to do."
Yeah.
Again, one of the statements we made at the beginning of Joshua is God always speaks with and works within the current context and above it. So, and these were very tribalistic. I keep saying this, but very tribalistic, very warfare, very messed up cultures.
Yep.
And so God doesn't condone these things in these moments, but he's speaking and working within these things and then redeeming them from it. Mm-hmm. But we have to be careful too to not say, well, God never commanded, that never commanded Joshua to wipe people out. Oh yeah, he did.
Yeah.
But there was a reason for it.
I want to say that phrasing again. He worked within it and above it. How did you say that?
God always works and speaks both within our context and above our context.
As someone who teaches that and knows it and believes it, do you understand why for some people it's really hard to accept that? Like, he works within it and above it, but God could look at it and be like, this is not okay, we're not going to do things this way.
And he does from time to time.
Sure.
I mean, and even at the beginning of Judges, we see one of those times. One of the very first judges is a woman, Deborah. Mm-hmm. Women were devalued.
Yeah.
And God is making a statement. Boom.
Yeah.
One of the greatest leaders in Judges is a woman. That this devaluing of women is not my plan.
Yeah.
And uses her to deliver Israel during that moment. And it's like people struggle with slavery. God never condones slavery. You say, but there are times he says, but when you have slaves, no, you always have to chase the thread. The trajectory that he's taking people to is redeeming and restoring culture. The trajectory, like with slavery and the value of women, is always back towards restoration. Getting rid of slavery, valuing women, valuing the underprivileged and the undefended.
And it kind of harkens back to that verse in Matthew that I brought up, I want to say it was two podcasts ago now, where Jesus is talking to the disciples about the law about divorce. And he's saying this law shouldn't have had to exist, but because of your sin and the things you were doing wrong, that's why this law came in. Not because divorce is cool and here's the right way to do it, but because this thing is happening, here's kind of a...
Remember,
like
it's
that
a
first
journey
step
from
towards,
garden to garden.
Yep.
And again, we go, God, why is it taking so long?
It can be frustrating.
Well, and again, we don't always understand, excuse me, that. But we learn God always does things the right way and the best way. And, we want him to make us strong like that. And God says, no, let's grow your muscles.
Yeah.
and muscles take pain.
Yeah. We don't have to get into everything, but there's plenty more in Judges that we could. There's is it Jephthah, however you say his name. He sacrifices his daughter as if that's what God wanted him to do. That guy's pretty swell.
Yeah.
And then you had the Danites go and like slaughter this peaceful town, like as if they're doing the right thing, and then they worship idols while they're there. Yeah. And it's just like one thing after another. I mean, the Samson's whole story, which is one that more of us are probably familiar with, but there's just so much awfulness in Judges.
And it is. And I think that's one of the points of Judges. One of the points of Judges is just how viral sin has gone, and how messed up it is, and how God is redeeming this. But even the process, as he's walking through this, it's a journey to take people out of this. You know, it's like, it's a little bit like detoxing someone who has been, on some kind of medication or drug or whatever. It's going to take a while to detox, and the body's going to react and reject. We as humanity, he's trying to detox them, and they keep wanting to go back to it, and it's going to get painful. They're going to do things and say things. I think one of the encouraging things that helps me with this is, but it's a hard one, is I can learn from and even be led by messed up people and messed up leaders.
Yep.
And I want to be very careful. Don't hear me say that we should ignore or excuse or don't deal with the sins of leaders, because we've seen examples both in church and outside the church where people went, it's the church, we need to be nice. No, we need to deal with sin. We need to deal with it gracefully, but also with truth. But just because someone has sinned or isn't doesn't mean I can't learn from them and haven't learned from them.
Is it fair to say that everybody that's joining on the Grow podcast is currently learning from a leader who has sinned?
Yes, absolutely. And I've had leaders who've had all kinds of issues who've helped me be closer to God.
Yeah.
All kinds of different things, whether it's ego or insecurity or came out later some kind of immorality. Doesn't mean they didn't know what it meant to be closer to God. It meant they made some horrible choices.
But do you think if they sacrificed their daughter, you would be able to continue to follow them? I would struggle with that. This is such a hard book for me as a Christ follower. It's an interesting book for me as a person who's interested in history and that time of human existence. As a follower of Christ, it's a hard book for me to.
But here's one thought. I don't know if you've thought about this before, but and especially if you're struggling with faith and this is a huge obstacle, listen, if I were to make up a religion and a book to convince people to follow me, I would not include things like this.
Yeah.
The Bible is an intensely honest book about who we are as a messed up people, and intensely honest about the leaders who are learning to follow God.
Yeah.
You fast forward to the New Testament, the disciples were not painted as all just great following people.
Yeah.
I mean, Peter, every time he opened his mouth, stuck his foot in it. Paul, the greatest missionary arguably who ever lived, probably had a little bit of an anger problem from time to time. And we don't know for sure, but he's a Pharisee. I don't, from what we understand from history, it would have been nearly impossible for him to be a Pharisee and not be married, because that would have been some of the requirements of a young Jewish man. And yet he's not married. What happened? Even in more recent history, John Wesley, he led one of the greatest revivals in the history of the United Kingdom. His wife hated him. He wasn't a perfect man. He was, we would probably call him OCD and a driven man. And yet he led a great revival. I'm not excusing it. And here's the deal.
Yeah.
The Bible does not excuse it. It just says God constantly leads us through it.
Yeah. And I think it can be helpful for us when we're struggling with a sin of our own, like the sin cycles that we were talking about, we're going to continue to talk about, to know that not only can I be redeemed from this and be helped out of it, but I'm not the first person that God has dealt with that's been stuck in the cycle of sin.
Yeah, and it doesn't disqualify me from ever being used. It might for a season.
Sure. Yep.
You know, and I've walked through, and, you know, you and I probably both know some people who have made a choice that did disqualify them from leadership for a season, and yet they chose to repent. They chose to walk through a season of restoration. There's consequences that will will be part of their life for the rest of their life. But they're back in leadership and restored and stronger than before. Are they perfect? No. Neither am I.
You had some strategies for us to be ruthless about maintaining
our
relationship with God.
That's a great word. I like that word.
But it was that was pretty quick. Can we go a little? Do we have?
This ties in with a little bit
today,
of the end of Judges, or the end of Joshua, where we talked about putting God at the center and making worship your practice. And I think one of the hardest things with us talking about that and talking about how to do that is it's not cookie cutter. This is going to look different for every one of us.
Yeah.
So let me just deal with temptation and sin. What tempts me the most is probably not going to be what tempts you the most. I mean, there'll be some similar kinds of things.
Sure.
But, you know, for some people, let's just go with, you know, some that are maybe more common. A person that is tempted by alcohol, which for me, there's not a temptation there. It doesn't mean I'm better than that right. person. I come actually from a long line of alcoholics. So I have an addictive personality. And so intentionally, I've avoided it completely. I just don't play the game because I know it could possibly tempt me. I don't even know whether it will or not. But food does. And I've had to learn, and again, we talked about a few weeks ago, I've had to learn, and it took me till I'm 50. I was 52 years old when I began to learn how to deal with it. And this is where we get confused, because we want to say, like this says in Judges, everyone did what was right in their own eyes.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely not true. But this is where we get confused, because it sounds like we're talking morals, and we are, but we're talking about how to protect our morals. So it's a little bit different. So here's what I'm saying. What I need to do, let's just talk health, to maintain and be a good steward of the body God gave me. What I need to do for me is different in many ways than what you need to do. Because what tempts me is different. You know, Jelly Bellies, we'll just joke about that. Jelly Bellies used to tempt me. Now, you know, I've dealt with that in different ways, but it took years for doing that. So here's the deal. We all have to be ruthless in different ways to guard our hearts, is the point of that. So you learn where it's easy for you to compromise and be ruthless in not going close to that. People used to make fun of Billy Graham because he had, you know, some of his Billy Graham rules. Like he would never have a meal or be alone with a person of the opposite sex. And people are like, you can't do that. That's devaluing them. He said, well, there's two reasons. One, I make the choice, so it's not that I have never been tempted. I just can't be tempted if I don't have the opportunity to. And secondly, you know, no one can accuse me of something if there's no place where they can accuse me of something. And when people say he's devaluing women, he said, no, I want to make sure I don't ever devalue a woman. You know, but he would, like when he would travel, he would never travel alone. When he would stay at a hotel, he would have the TV removed so that nothing on it would ever tempt him. And people go, that's extreme. Well, he's going, it's not that I won't be tempted. I'm going to be ruthless so that I don't ever even have to deal with the temptation. And you know, people go, well, I could never do that. Well, then, you know, you're going to struggle and you're going to go from crisis to crisis. That's why this sin cycle happens, because we say, I won't make that choice. And so what do? We begin to take that for granted, and we slowly compromise and we slowly drift. So for me, you know, there are some of those things. I know a good friend of mine has had a long-standing struggle with pornography. And so he just lives differently than everybody else. Every single thing on his phone that he looks up on the browser on his phone, every website, he has an app on there that is instantly emails the website to his wife. People go, oh, no, he said, it just removes the temptation.
Yep.
Because I know she'll kill me. And I've got another friend, he's got an app, and it sends it all to a friend, an accountability partner. And along with this, you've got to make a commitment to know God's word.
Yeah.
Because when we know the truth, it will set us free. One of the things, and I keep coming back like to the health journey. One of the things that changed for me was, like we talked about a few weeks ago, to think about the limits, not as things that are diminishing my life, but producing my life. But along with that, to have a structure. I had a clear plan. This is how I need to eat. I actually need to eat more often than that. Once I had a clear plan, it removed the temptation for me.
Yeah.
And did I want an extra jelly bean once in a while? But you know what? It's working, and I love the way I'm living. So it's like, it removes the temptation for me. So for us, identify, just like with temptation, identify what's tempting you. And you may need to live differently than the rest of the world to eliminate that temptation. Identify what's draining you and figure out what refills you. I listened to someone the other day just talking about refilling you, and they every morning go for a walk, every day at lunch go for a walk, and every evening they go for a walk. And part of that is because they're counselors, so they deal with some heavy stuff. So they just take the time to refill themselves. You've got to do that.
What would you say to someone who's stuck in that sin cycle where they just I just can't get out, no matter what if it's food or alcoholism or pornography or I mean, we don't need to list every sin that exists in the world, but and I feel, and for those of us that might be in that point, as I read through Judges, two things might be happening. One, I feel like I understand, like, man, I get what that looks like to keep going back to the same screw up over and over again. And then it also might be a frustrating thing because, I see these big things happen in Judges. I'm like, where's Samson here to kill all the Philistines for me, so I don't have to deal with this temptation anymore. Meanwhile, I feel like, I've tried to stop this, but I just can't get out of that cycle.
Yeah. I think, one, we just talked about, make sure you're immersing yourself in his word, because when you understand his word, it will help you answer the questions about sin. Two, if you're stuck in the cycle, ask God for help. This goes back to the thread we started with Moses. God always delivers when we ask him. Yeah. Rarely in our timing or the method we want, but always.
I think that's often how we see it.
I think, and this goes back to Gideon's story. Read Gideon's story in Judges. If God prompts you to do something, do it.
Yeah.
And we go, was it really you, God? Listen, I've never regretted acting on something that I thought was God with a clear prompting. I would rather make a mistake acting on something that I think was God than make the mistake of going, I'm not sure it's you, so I'm not going to do it. It's like, I was walking down the street and God prompted me to give some money to someone. Mm-hmm. Like, is that you, God, or is that just my guilt? I've never regretted making that mistake.
I think, can I add a qualifier? Yeah. And you can tell me if I'm wrong to add this qualifier. But going back to what you were just talking about with, as long as you have a commitment to knowing God's word, and because
it's got to be in line with his word.
Because going back to what we talked about earlier, Jephthah or whatever that sacrificed his daughter, in his mind was like, we have to do that. I said that what are you doing? I sacrificed the first thing that came out of the door, so I have to do it.
Well, it's like the guy who sat in my office years ago and said, God told me to move in with my girlfriend. Yeah. And we don't need to get married. I'm going, no, God did not tell you that. Maybe a little g God, but not God, because he's not going to tell you something. But if he prompts you, I think the third or the next thing with this is one we just talked about. Eliminate opportunity for temptation as much as possible.
Sure. Yeah.
Like with Samson, if he would have stopped visiting other women in other villages. Let's eliminate that. So if you are tempted, we'll pick on the one we just talked about with pornography. Maybe, and you say, this is just crazy. Maybe you don't have the password to your computer at home, and someone else has to put that in.
Mm-hmm.
Say, but I need to get on the computer. Do you? If it's going to mess up your life, maybe you take that opportunity off your phone, whatever you. And I think the last thing is you need an army around you. I think we learned this from Judges.
Yeah.
You need an army around you. God didn't always use the army, but the people needed people with them.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't need as big of an army as we think we need. Gideon should prove that, right?
Yeah.
God kept whittling down
multiple times. Yeah.
You need people who are with you,
mm-hmm.
and not everybody's with you.
Yeah. Do you have any next steps for us this week? Any homework, anything like that? Any last thoughts on the book of Judges?
So I would go back to, at the end of the message this weekend on Judges, I gave kind of 4 steps in learning how to break the sin cycle. I'll review them real quick. Be ruthless about maintaining your relationship with God. Regularly ask God if you're rebelling against him. Ask God to let you get caught before it gets worse. That's a hard one, right?
Yeah.
And ask God to deliver you if you're stuck. Figure out, kind of where you are, and lean into one of those will matter for where you are
mm-hmm.
because we're all somewhere in the sin cycle. You said, but am I in the sin cycle? Well, you could be in the faithful following part.
Sure.
Right there.
Yeah.
Just make sure you are ruthless about maintaining it so you don't begin to drift.
Mm.
If you feel like you're on the rebellious side, ask God to help it come out in the open, to force you
mm-hmm.
to turn back to him, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So figure out which one of those and lean into one of those this week.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Pastor Mike. Let's get on to some less violent books. Well, we got a little ways to go before they get less violent.
Judges. Next is Ruth. Ruth is a good.
That's less
good
violent.
book. A very short book.
Yeah.
And an interesting book.
I know. Yeah, my wife is very excited for this one. Her middle name is Ruth.
Oh, is she?
So very excited for
and
that
our
one.
Weekend teaching for Ruth will actually not be me.
That's actually why she's excited.
Yeah, it's probably why she's excited about it.
It also won't be me. That's why I'm excited about it.
Pastor Kylie is going to be teaching it. I've already read it, her teaching, and it is good, far better than I could have done with it. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. Make sure you join us for that one, again, at any of our campuses or gatherings or anything like that, or online. And we'll see you here next week on the Grow Podcast.
Right.
We love all of you. We love our New Hope family. We're so glad that you joined us for the Grow Podcast. Remember that growth always starts with the next step. So don't just come and hang out and listen to Pastor Mike be smart for 30 minutes, but take an action step of some sort in this week, figuring out where you might be in that sin cycle and work to take care of it. So thank you again, Pastor Mike, and we'll see you guys next time.